what we're going to discuss today is something a little bit different than I think that we normally do in our presentations. And I hope to get across some important concepts to investors and make it sort of lighthearted at the same time. And so the title of the talk is "The Rocks Are Talking, Are We Listening?" And why, as an investor, and I'm an investor as well, the rocks are important. Typical disclaimer, because obviously we're a junior company and I may make some forward-looking statements. So, do rocks talk? Well, if you read children's books, apparently not, because they all talk if rocks could talk. And so what I want to demonstrate today is that, well, maybe that's not the case. There's also others that say how you can talk to a rock and that it's okay if you talk to a rock, but don't expect any reply. And as an exploration geologist, I would take issue with that because I think the rocks are talking to us. Just some of us are prepared to listen and others aren't. So, yes, some of us can hear rocks talking. Some read the rocks, others listen to the rocks. And at the end of the day, the rocks don't lie. So it's really important that we try to extract as much information out of the rocks as possible as explorationists. And obviously for investors to understand that the team that they're putting their money behind also understands the value of extracting as much information out of the rocks as possible. Exploration geologists really are akin to detectives. Both are looking for clues to solve a mystery. Obviously, in the case of exploration, we're looking to solve where is the mineralization, where did it come from, and where can I find more? I got a really good appreciation of this early in my career, wandering through the flatland swamps of northern Ontario in bug-infested areas where there was very little outcropping rock to look at. In many places, less than 1% to 2%. And in those areas, rock was a premium. And so when you found rock, you really needed to examine it as closely as possible. And in many places, we actually created our own outcrops by peeling back a thin veneer of thick forest moss, again in a cloud of black flies and mosquitoes. But this was the only window we had into looking at what the geology and the rocks were trying to tell us, because they've been muffled for millions of years. And when we do find outcrops, there's a picture of me in my younger days working in Ontario. We try to extract as much information out of those few outcrops as we can. So, like I mentioned, we're both, like detectives and geologists, we're both interrogating witnesses to obtain critical information. In the case of the detective, wanting to know where the witness was at a certain time. In the case of geologists, we're interrogating our witnesses who are rocks. And for most people, they think that those rocks don't talk, but I beg to differ with that. Our witnesses in exploration are surface rock outcrops and subsurface drill cores. And the drill cores are a particularly critical investigation tool. In Spanish, interestingly enough, drill cores are called testigos, and the translation of testigos into English is witnesses. And so you can see there is this kind of almost unwritten association of exploration geologists doing exploration and a detective. And it's really important as exploration geologists, because we are detectives of a kind, we extract as much information, i.e. evidence, from as many witnesses as possible to help us find more mineral deposits. The foundation of the mining business, in my mind, is rocks and geology. I know there'll be a lot of lawyers and accountants and others out there that will think that they're the foundation of the mining business, but I beg to disagree. Without good exploration geologists going out and actually finding mineral deposits, the rest of the mining value chain would not exist. There are many projects around the world that have abandoned drill core. This is also the case where there's been poorly cared for drill core, both of which are lost information and lost opportunities for future explorers. Because drilling is the most expensive exploration activity that we do, it also is the activity that creates the most value for shareholders, especially in the early stages of the mining value chain. Therefore, it's really important that core is our most valuable asset and needs to be properly cared for and stored, as you can see in our warehouses here in Argentina for the Altar project. Fortunately, the previous owners of the project kept all the core in very good standing, well organized. So we were able to come in at a later date and go back and see every meter of drill core that was ever drilled on the project. And when we took the project over, there was close to 120,000 meters or 120 kilometers of core to review. And we were able to extract a lot of valuable information from that core. So it's really important that we take care of this asset because, like I said, it's costly to get, and we want to try to get as much information out of that witness as we can. So at the Altar project in Argentina, we've done a lot of work in the early stages of our taking over the project in 2018. We spent pretty much the first 2 years investigating and questioning the witnesses, which in this case were field rock outcrops and also reviewing historical drill core and making some observations, such as this piece of core right here, that showed that we had a very special kind of alteration that hadn't been particularly well documented before here at Altar, that suggested that there might be some overprinting of different systems one on the other, and also the recognition of these UST type early magmatic quartz structures. Now, I'm not going to go into all the technical details today about the details of how we used all of these, but suffice it to say that that old historic core was absolutely critical and valuable in terms of us taking a decision to take on the project, because on the basis of that extracted information, we thought that we saw that there was a large possibility of adding value that may not have been fully realized previously. So at Aldebaran, we spent a lot of time and effort extracting as much information from those cores or our witnesses so that we knew that this would add extensive value downstream. We also fundamentally believe in building a solid foundation. If this is not done correctly, potential disaster looms. And without a solid foundation, you'll have trouble creating anything of value in the exploration business. It'll be a house of cards that without a good solid foundation, whatever little breeze comes along will knock everything down and disaster will assume. So a big part of this is the geological characterization. And this is an interesting article that was on the SRK Consultant webpage talking about geologic modeling and mineral resources. And I really liked it because I think they hit the nail on the head. First, initial robust characterization of the ore body's geology and mineralization controls is essential to developing a confident mineral resource estimate, understanding the geologic risks of the project, and ultimately to the successful advancement of a project. but also by understanding your rocks from the beginning, using experienced and qualified geologists, it becomes more straightforward and less risky engineering exercise to develop the mine. You're basically building confidence moving forward. But failure to adequately characterize and interpret the mineralization controls, and the project may end up being doomed before the first ton is mined. And I think a real life example of this, and some of you out there will probably remember this. This is back in 2015, and this is the Rubicon Minerals meltdown in the Red Lake Gold Camp of Northern Ontario. And they basically put together a very large gold resource, decided to go right from the PEA to mining and skip the pre-feasibility and the feasibility studies. And when they started to go underground and started to try mining, everything came to a grinding halt because the ore wasn't there. And the company acknowledged that the geology of the deposit is more complex than previously thought, and a new development plan is needed. And the stock plunged 55%, and a lot of shareholders lost a lot of money. And quite frankly, the junior and the intermediate mining business took a bit of a hit because of this fiasco. And this could have all been avoided by doing the fundamental geology well in the beginning. So now shifting gears and talking a little bit more about Aldebaran and how we apply some of this knowledge. Most of you will be familiar with the Lassonde curve, and I just like to demonstrate that where we're focused at Aldebaran Resource, and quite frankly at our sister company Regulus Resources, is in this part of the Lassonde curve, which is the discovery phase, where we see that there's the greatest opportunity to add valuation before we move into a development stage, feasibility and development stage. So what is our philosophy? Well, we're a company that's got a clear business model and a successful track record. We exercised and completed this business model with our first junior company, Antares Minerals, which we started in 2004 and sold the first quantum in 2010 after a large porphyry copper discovery in southern Peru. We spun out Regulus Resources and have another large copper gold project in northern Peru called Antiquary with the same game plan in progress right now. And then from that, we were able to get into the Altar project, which we thought, even though it had already a very large resource associated with it, that there was significant potential to increase the value and increase the size of this very, very special porphyry copper. So that's basically the philosophy and the business model. And what is our approach and how do we do this? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have the mining value chain. And as I also mentioned, ore body characterization is critical. And you can see I've got the chain here, and you can see that the chain is only as strong as the weakest link. And you can see that one of the early things that needs to be done after exploration and initial discovery is the ore body characterization. And if this is biased or inadequate, it is impossible to optimize the subsequent links of the chain, which are things like resource definition, geometallurgy, mine planning, reserve definition, mining, the blending, mineral processing, even tailings, waste disposal, marketing of the metals, and eventually sound mine closure and reclamation. So really, we need to get this ore body characterization correct, because if we don't properly understand it, it will be value destructive to all the other links in the chain. Therefore, by extracting added value from the rocks, we are in fact de-risking the project, which will be critical to not only future discoveries of new mineralization, but also to the future development and production of a mine in the future. So like I mentioned, what's our approach in terms of trying to build a solid foundation? Well, for us, the principal foundation is critical observations from field mapping and drill core logging. The rocks are talking, and we need to listen. And on the basis of this, we can use other techniques like geophysics and geochemistry, geotechnical work, hyperspectral, environmental, ESG things to help enhance the project. But at the bottom line is that the rocks are the thing that are the fundamental building block to all of this pyramid. As we develop the project, we need to make a lot of effort and time to correctly look at ore body definition and characterization. That means building very sound geological and structural models. On the basis of these models, we then go to a mineral resource, which involves building a mineral resource block model. And then when we look at metallurgy, we'll have a much better idea by creating domains that integrate all of our detailed geological and mineralogical and structural data with our mineral resource block model to create a geometallurgical domain model, which will then help us determine what are the pathways forward that give us the most opportunity to extract value in terms of mineral processing options, mining method options, etc. And then once we have these soundly in place, we can embark on a preliminary economic assessment. And this is really going to be the first look at the economics of our deposit. And then clearly then we can move on to the pre-feasibility or feasibility stage, where we're going to use much more refined, detailed engineering, permitting, and economic parameters to look at whether the project is potentially viable. And then from that, a mine construction decision can be made where detailed engineering, final permits, cost, etc. And then we go into production and extraction of metals. And that's really why we started this in the first place, was to try to get metals out of the ground in an environmentally safe and economic way. And then eventually, we're going to have to close and reclaim the mine in an environmentally sound way. And again, this will be predicated on our understanding of those rocks, because they do dictate whether we're going to have acid drainage or other types of issues that need to be addressed during any closure and reclamation. So this is really the building a solid foundation pyramid from the perspective of myself and how we apply it at both Aldebaran and also at our sister company, Regulus. So again, at the Altar project, like I mentioned, from 2019 to 2020, when we first picked up the project, we focused on ore body characterization. This meant relogging close to 120,000 meters of historical drill holes, extracting as much geological information out of that as we could. We also completed the first surface geological map over the entire project area. And from that, we built our geological and structural model in 3D, both at the district scale and at the more detailed deposit scale. And we also integrated modeling of the different metals that we thought were going to be potentially important in terms of the economics: gold, copper, silver, also deleterious elements such as arsenic as well. Need to understand where these are distributed, how they occur, because this all has implications to the mining value chain. We also integrated geophysical data because we want to be able to see below the surface before we spend money drilling, because drilling, as I mentioned, is very expensive. And so geophysics like ground magnetics, three-dimensional IP and MT data, which I've gone through in previous webinars on our Aldebaran site, and also using regional talus fine geochemistry samples, integrating all of this to characterize our ore body in 3D, and then from that extracting a geometallurgical model, which will then allow us to have a good idea of what processing and mining options there are available to us to move forward. So because we're working on a deposit that's actually really a cluster of different porphyry deposits, this type of approach becomes critical. And why I say that is, I'll use this analogy. It's called the raindrop rings in the pond analogy to show potentially what happens when we have multiple overprinting porphyry systems. So you can imagine that we've got some big fault structures that are controlling where the distribution of those raindrops are. But in this case, they're actually controlling the distribution of where there are multiple porphyry centers that are coming in at different times and potentially have slightly different characters and mineralogies, and that there'll be alteration that would be associated with each of those. Some of them showing strong proximal alteration and mineralization, with outer zone of more weak distal alteration and mineralization. And I think you can start to see what happens is that we might start to get areas where we get overlap and interference patterns of the alteration and mineralization. So it's really important that we as exploration geologists, when we're looking at the drill core, that we try to see this and extract this information in order to be able to put this into its context and its timing relationships. And this may actually give us clues that there may be potentially hidden systems with cryptic alteration and mineralization that we previously didn't recognize were potentially there. And so in the case of Altar, we've got known porphyry centers with their alteration and their characteristics, but there were some indications, some signals between Altar Central and Altar East that there might be something else going on. And so in 2018, we came up with this exploration upside, which we called Altar Deep, which we're now probably going to end up calling Altar United, because you'll see in a minute that it appears that we postulated that maybe we've got the Altar Central Porphyry Center here, the Altar East Porphyry Center here, some very shallow limited drilling in the area in between, and there were signals coming from the core, from the historic drill core when we did our revision, that suggested that maybe there's something going on in between. And so this is a similar cross section now, just focused in on that Altar Central and Altar East area. Here you can see the current pit for our 2021 resource calculation. And again, this information is on our website. But what we can see is there were 3 deep holes on this section. This hole was drilled back in 2019, and we hit over 1,000 meters of 0.53 copper equivalent. In last year, we drilled hole 221. That also hit over 1 kilometer of 0.4 copper equivalent. And then this year, earlier this year, we released the hole 223, located here, where we can see we hit almost 1,200 meters of 0.48 copper equivalent. And interestingly enough, a higher grade sequence here right near the last over 400 meters of almost 0.7 copper equivalent. The part that's very interesting is you can see there's some higher grade sitting right below the existing conceptual pit, very little drilling. And the distances there, you can see the current resource block model in pit. And you can see there's a very large geophysical anomaly, a conductivity anomaly that appears to be very coincident with the known mineralization. This is covered in some previous webinars that I've done, so I'm not going to go into great detail here, but suffice it to say that these drill holes are very spaced well apart from one another. You can see these 2 holes right here are over 700 meters apart, and these 2 holes here are over 500 meters apart. And all of this was a result of basically extracting as much geological information out of the rocks as we could. And so the rocks are talking. We are listening. Maybe not listening like this young lady with her headphones attached to a boulder in her living room, but some people like to talk to trees. We exploration geologists like to listen to rocks. And finally, a geologist, from the rocks perspective, finally a geologist who listened to us. Yeah, it only took them 10 million years. Oh my God, you fools, we're doomed for the primary crusher. Because we finally were listening to them and we realized that there's a lot of copper and a lot of value and a lot of potential for a future mine at the Altar project. So just in summary, a quick investment recap, why Aldebaran is a company that should be watched and invested in. We are listening to the rocks. And we have an aggressive drill program underway, testing high impact targets that came from our listening of the rocks. And I think it's a compelling valuation, and we're a well-funded company. So with that, I would just like to thank everybody for their attention. And hopefully this has been a little bit humorous, but also educational, and giving you an idea that the rocks are important to our business and to you as an investor, and that any future investments you make, you might want to be talking and checking who's on their technical team. Do they put value in extracting information from the rocks? A lot of companies do, a lot of companies don't, and it's important to know the difference. And we are one of those companies that believes in listening to the rock. So thanks to Six again, and I hope that this has been informative for all of you out there.